Red and blue flashing lights shattered the quiet suburban evening, turning a joyful family celebration into an absolute nightmare. A renowned structural architect, his doctor wife, and their two terrified children found themselves staring down a rogue officer on a dangerous power trip. But this arrogant cop made one catastrophic miscalculation. He picked the wrong family on the wrong street on the exact night they were expected at a private dinner with the most powerful man in the state. What happened next ended a career instantly. Marcus Ellison adjusted the rearview mirror, catching a glimpse of his young son Jordan and daughter Ava completely absorbed in their tablets in the back seat. Beside him in the passenger seat, his wife Elena reached over and gently squeezed his hand. She offered a warm, proud smile that seemed to erase the exhaustion of recent months. Tonight was supposed to be a night of triumph. Marcus had just been named the lead structural engineer for the state's multi-billion-dollar coastal revitalization project. It was the crowning achievement of his career, a testament to decades of grueling work, late nights, and overcoming the systemic hurdles that often stood in the way of a black man in a highly conservative, legacy-dominated industry. To celebrate, they were heading to an exclusive, invitation-only dinner at a private residence in Oak Creek, one of the most affluent and highly secured neighborhoods in the metropolitan area. The sprawling estates, manicured lawns, and ancient oak trees lining the boulevards screamed generational wealth. Marcus navigated their pristine navy blue Lexus SUV through the winding, dimly lit roads. He drove precisely the speed limit, aware as he had been his entire adult life that driving a luxury vehicle in a neighborhood like this often attracted unwanted attention. His caution, however, was not enough. Without warning, the blinding glare of police spotlights flooded the cabin of the Lexus. The harsh red and blue strobes painted the trees and the leather interior of the car in erratic, chaotic flashes. The sudden siren burst, a sharp, aggressive whoop whoop, made Ava jump in her seat, dropping her tablet to the floorboard. "Daddy, what's happening?" she asked, her voice trembling instantly. Marcus's heart plummeted, a familiar heavy dread settling in his stomach. He tightened his grip on the steering wheel, intentionally keeping his hands at the 10 o'clock and 2 o'clock position. "It's okay, sweetie. Just a traffic stop. Everyone stay calm and keep your hands where they can be seen," he instructed, his voice steady, masking the spike of adrenaline flooding his veins. He pulled over smoothly onto the shoulder, turning on the dome light and rolling down all 4 windows before the cruiser even came to a complete stop behind them. Elena sat rigidly, her professional demeanor as a pediatrician giving way to the hyper-vigilance of a black mother in America. She unlocked her phone, keeping it resting face down on her lap, ready. Heavy footsteps crunched against the gravel. A flashlight beam aggressively swept through the back seat, lingering on the frightened faces of the children before moving to Elena and finally stopping directly on Marcus's face, blinding him. "Evening, officer," Marcus said calmly, squinting into the glare. "How can I help you tonight?" Officer Shane Whitaker did not return the greeting. He was a heavily built man with a tight buzz cut and an aggressive posture, standing unnecessarily close to the driver's side door. He kept his hand resting heavily on the butt of his sidearm, a deliberate, terrifying intimidation tactic. "License, registration, and proof of insurance. Now," Whitaker demanded. His tone wasn't just authoritative, it was laced with a palpable, unwarranted hostility. "Of course," Marcus replied smoothly. "My license is in my wallet in my back right pocket, and the registration is in the glove compartment. I am going to reach for them now. Is that all right?" "Just get the documents," Whitaker snapped, his flashlight beam never wavering from Marcus's eyes. Marcus moved slowly, telegraphing every action. He handed the cards through the window. Whitaker snatched them, glancing at the name and the Oak Creek address on the license, which Marcus had recently updated after purchasing a property on the other side of the district. Whitaker's eyes narrowed, shifting from the ID to Marcus, then back to the luxury interior of the Lexus. "This your vehicle, Marcus?" Whitaker asked, using his first name with a deliberate lack of respect. "Yes, officer. It is registered in my name, as you can see on the documentation." "What are you doing in this neighborhood?" Whitaker pressed, leaning closer to the window. The smell of stale coffee and peppermint gum wafted into the car. "You're a long way from the highway." "We are heading to a private dinner party about a mile up the road," Marcus explained, keeping his tone perfectly neutral. Whitaker let out a short, cynical scoff. "A private dinner party? Right. In Oak Creek. Who's hosting?" "I don't believe I'm required to share my host's private information for a routine traffic stop," Marcus said firmly, though still polite. "Could you tell me why I was pulled over, officer?" Whitaker's jaw tightened. The subtle challenge to his authority was clearly something he wasn't accustomed to tolerating. "You were swerving back there, and this vehicle matches the description of an SUV seen leaving the scene of a residential burglary 2 towns over earlier today." Elena let out a sharp exhale of disbelief. "A burglary? We just left our home recently. My husband hasn't swerved once." "Ma'am, keep quiet unless you're spoken to," Whitaker barked, pointing a thick finger at Elena. Jordan whimpered in the back seat, and Ava began to cry softly. Marcus's protective instincts flared, but he forced himself to remain stoic. He knew exactly how this game was played, and he knew the lethal consequences of losing his temper. "Officer, my family is in the car. We are fully cooperating. If you want to run the plates and check the registration against the VIN, please do so. But there is no need to raise your voice at my wife." "Step out of the vehicle," Whitaker ordered, suddenly taking a step back and unsnapping the retention strap on his holster. "Step out of the vehicle," Marcus repeated, his voice dropping an octave, though he remained entirely still. "Officer, for a supposed traffic violation, there is no legal requirement for me to exit my car, especially with my young children present and terrified. I am giving you a lawful order, Marcus. Step out of the vehicle right now or I will remove you from it," Whitaker shouted, spit flying from his lips. He unclipped his radio. "Dispatch, I need a second unit at Oak Creek Boulevard. Suspect is becoming non-compliant." "Non-compliant?" Elena gasped, her hands trembling as she flipped her phone over and hit record, immediately capturing Whitaker's aggressive stance. "He hasn't moved. He's doing exactly what you asked." "I told you to shut your mouth," Whitaker roared, shining the flashlight directly into Elena's camera lens. "Put that phone away, or you're going in for obstruction." "It is my First Amendment right to record police activity," Elena fired back, her voice shaking, but her resolve ironclad. She was a doctor who handled emergency room traumas. She knew how to operate under pressure, even as a mother fearing for her husband's life. Marcus unbuckled his seatbelt with agonizing slowness. "Elena, let me handle this. Keep the camera rolling," he said softly. He turned his attention back to Whitaker. "Officer, I am stepping out of the vehicle slowly. I am unarmed. I am not a threat to you." Marcus opened the door and stepped out into the cool night air. Despite being several inches taller than Whitaker, Marcus kept his shoulders slightly slumped, intentionally minimizing his physical presence. But Whitaker wasn't looking to de-escalate. The moment Marcus's feet hit the pavement, Whitaker grabbed his arm, violently spinning him around and slamming him against the side of the Lexus. The heavy thud of Marcus's body against the metal sent a shockwave through the car. Ava screamed. "Hey, what are you doing?" Elena shrieked, pushing her door open but staying behind it, holding the phone high. "Spread your legs. Hands behind your back," Whitaker yelled, kicking Marcus's feet apart and aggressively patting him down. He yanked Marcus's wrists together, and the cold, unforgiving steel of handcuffs ratcheted tightly into Marcus's skin. "Officer Whitaker, Marcus grunted, his cheek pressed against the cold window of his own car, locking eyes with his weeping son inside. "You are making a massive mistake. You are detaining me without probable cause, using excessive force, and traumatizing my children. I am not resisting. I have committed no crime. You match the description of a burglar, and you were acting suspiciously." Whitaker sneered, clearly enjoying the domination. "Now you're under arrest for resisting." By now, the commotion had drawn the attention of the neighborhood. The front door of a nearby mansion opened, and a woman in an elegant evening gown, Mrs. Helen Carver, walked briskly down her driveway, holding her own phone up to record the scene. "Officer?" Helen Carver called out from a safe distance across the manicured lawn. "I live right here. What is going on? I've been watching from the window. That man did nothing wrong." Whitaker whipped his head around, momentarily distracted. "Back off, lady. This is active police business. Go back inside." "I will not," Helen Carver shouted back, stepping closer to the curb. "I see a family being terrorized. You pulled them over for absolutely nothing. I am recording everything and I am calling the precinct." The presence of a wealthy white resident challenging him seemed to fluster Whitaker, but it only made him double down on his aggression. He shoved Marcus toward the rear of the vehicle, marching him toward the cruiser. "You're going to sit in the back of my car while I search yours," Whitaker growled into Marcus's ear. "You do not have my consent to search my vehicle," Marcus stated loudly and clearly for both cameras to capture. "There is no probable cause. You cannot search my car. I have reasonable suspicion that stolen goods are in that vehicle," Whitaker lied seamlessly. "That gives me all the cause I need." Whitaker opened the back door of his cruiser and roughly pushed Marcus inside. The door slammed shut, leaving Marcus trapped in the suffocating plastic-lined cage. Through the reinforced window, he watched in agony as Whitaker marched back to the Lexus. Elena was standing outside the car now, blocking Whitaker's path to the open driver's door, still recording. "Step aside, ma'am," Whitaker ordered, reaching for his cuffs again. "Or you're joining him." "My children are in there," Elena said fiercely, tears streaming down her face, but her voice steady. "You will not enter this car without a warrant. You have traumatized them enough." The standoff was on a knife's edge. Whitaker was breathing heavily, his ego bruised by the defiance of a black woman refusing to cower, compounded by the neighbor who was still loudly narrating the officer's abuses from the lawn. Whitaker reached forward, grabbing Elena by the shoulder to forcibly move her out of the way. Then the piercing headlights of a massive black Chevrolet Suburban cut through the darkness, illuminating the entire scene. The heavy Suburban, adorned with official state government license plates, didn't just pull up. It dominated the space, parking at a sharp angle that effectively boxed in Whitaker's cruiser. The flashing police strobes reflected off the dark-tinted windows of the SUV. Whitaker paused, his hand still gripping Elena's shoulder. He squinted against the new headlights, clearly irritated by the interruption. He assumed it was an unmarked detective unit, or perhaps a wealthy resident who thought the rules didn't apply to them. "Hey, move that vehicle!" Whitaker shouted, stepping away from Elena and marching toward the Suburban. "This is an active crime scene. You can't park there." The front doors of the Suburban opened simultaneously. Two men in dark, perfectly tailored suits stepped out. They moved with a chilling synchronized efficiency that instantly screamed federal or high-level executive security. One of them, Agent Marcus Hale, placed his hand subtly near his lapel, his eyes scanning the scene, landing immediately on Whitaker. "Take a step back, officer," Agent Hale said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried a lethal authority that made Whitaker stop in his tracks. Before Whitaker could puff his chest and demand to know who these men were, the rear door of the Suburban swung open. Stepping into the red and blue flashing lights was a man whose face was plastered on every billboard, news channel, and newspaper in the state. He wore a sharp charcoal suit without a tie, exuding a quiet, formidable power. It was Governor Victor Lang. Governor Lang had built his entire political career on civil rights reform, infrastructure development, and rooting out the exact kind of systemic corruption that Whitaker represented. He was a man deeply respected and deeply feared by the police unions, known for his zero-tolerance policy regarding police brutality. Lang didn't look at Whitaker. His eyes immediately went to the Lexus, taking in Elena, who was leaning against the car, visibly shaking, and the two sobbing children in the back seat. Then his gaze tracked to the police cruiser, where he could see Marcus Ellison locked in the back, his hands cuffed behind him. A cold, dangerous fury settled over the governor's features. "What the hell is going on here?" Lang asked. His voice was dangerously quiet, cutting through the ambient noise of the sirens and the idling engines. Whitaker, still fully blinded by his own adrenaline and arrogance, didn't immediately recognize the man in the dim lighting. He saw an older gentleman in a suit and assumed it was just another wealthy, entitled resident of Oak Creek trying to interfere. "I told you people to back off," Whitaker barked, resting his hand on his weapon again. "I'm in the middle of a felony traffic stop. Get back in your vehicle, or you're all going in for obstruction of justice." Agent Hale took a single, fluid step forward, placing himself between the governor and the officer. "Officer, I strongly advise you to remove your hand from your service weapon immediately." "Who do you think you are?" Whitaker sneered. "I'm the law out here." Governor Lang stepped around his security detail, stepping fully into the harsh glare of the police spotlight. He walked directly up to Whitaker, stopping mere inches away. Up close, the realization hit Whitaker like a freight train. The officer's eyes widened in sheer panic, all the color draining from his face as he stared into the unblinking, furious eyes of the state's highest executive official. "I am Governor Victor Lang," he said, each word perfectly enunciated and dripping with venom. "And the man you have locked in the back of your cruiser, like an animal, is Marcus Ellison. He is the lead architect for this state, a personal friend of mine, and the guest of honor at the dinner I am hosting at my home 3 blocks from here." Whitaker's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The aggressive, dominating bully from 30 seconds ago completely evaporated, replaced by a terrified man realizing his career was imploding in real time. "Governor, I didn't—" Whitaker stammered, taking a clumsy step backward. "The vehicle. It matched a description." "Do not lie to me, officer," Lang interrupted, his voice echoing in the quiet street. "I live in this district. I read the morning briefings. There was no residential burglary involving a brand new Lexus SUV today. You pulled over a black family in a wealthy neighborhood, and when they didn't bow to your harassment, you assaulted a man in front of his wife and children." Helen Carver, still recording from the lawn, audibly gasped in validation. Elena lowered her phone slightly, letting out a heavy, shuddering breath as the sheer weight of the governor's presence shifted the entire reality of the night. "Get him out!" Lang commanded, pointing a rigid finger at the cruiser. "So department protocol dictates." Whitaker tried to weakly defend himself, his hands shaking so badly he could barely hold his keys. "Protocol!" Lang roared, losing his composed exterior for a fraction of a second. "You threw out protocol the second you laid hands on a cooperative citizen without probable cause. You will unlock those cuffs. You will apologize to his wife, and then you will surrender your badge to your commanding officer, who I am calling right now." Whitaker fumbled with his belt, stumbling toward his own cruiser. He opened the door, his hands trembling violently as he reached in to unlock the cuffs binding Marcus's wrists. Marcus stepped out of the vehicle, rolling his bruised shoulders, his expression tight but unbroken. "Marcus, I am so incredibly sorry," Lang said, stepping forward and extending his hand. "Are you hurt?" "I'm all right, Victor," Marcus replied, shaking the governor's hand firmly. But my children are terrified. And if you hadn't driven by—" "I know," Lang said softly, the grim reality of the situation hanging heavy in the air. He turned slowly back to Whitaker, who was standing by the open door of his cruiser, looking like a man standing on the gallows. "Agent Hale," Governor Lang said, without taking his eyes off the officer. "Yes, Governor. Get the state police superintendent on the phone. Tell him to get a captain down here to Oak Creek Boulevard immediately." Lang took a step closer to Whitaker. "Your shift is over, officer. And as of tomorrow morning, so is your career." Marcus Ellison stood beside his Lexus, rubbing his bruised, chafed wrists where the steel cuffs had bitten into his skin. Elena had her arms wrapped tightly around his waist, her face buried in his chest, silently shaking as the adrenaline finally gave way to shock. In the back seat, Jordan and Ava were huddled together, wide-eyed and traumatized. The damage done to those two innocent children in a matter of moments was something Marcus knew would take years of therapy to undo. Captain Leonard Shaw of the Oak Creek Municipal Police Department arrived moments later in an unmarked Ford Explorer, tires squealing as he slammed it into park. Shaw was a veteran, a man who had built his career on quietly sweeping departmental indiscretions under the rug. He climbed out, adjusting his belt, putting on a mask of bureaucratic concern. He took one look at Whitaker, who was now sitting sideways on the curb, pale and trembling, and then looked at the governor. Shaw instantly realized his department was standing on a live landmine. "Governor Lang," Captain Shaw said, rushing forward with his hand extended, projecting false confidence. "Sir, I apologize for the commotion. There clearly seems to be a misunderstanding here. Officer Whitaker is one of ours proactive patrolmen. We had a bolo for a vehicle matching this description regarding a burglary. Tensions are high. I assure you we will handle this internally." Governor Lang did not take Shaw's extended hand. He simply stared at it until Shaw awkwardly lowered it back to his side. "A bolo, Captain Shaw?" Lang's voice was dangerously calm. "Is that the official narrative your department is going to spin?" "Sir, police work is chaotic," Shaw stammered, attempting to maintain his authority in front of the gathering crowd of wealthy onlookers. "My officer made a split-second judgment call based on dispatch information. If Mr. Ellison felt slighted, we can certainly review the dashcam footage at the precinct, but there's no need for state police involvement." Agent Hale, standing just behind the governor's right shoulder, pulled a slim digital tablet from his inner jacket pocket. "Captain Shaw," Hale interrupted smoothly, "my office just pulled the regional dispatch logs. There is no bolo for a Navy Lexus SUV. There is no reported residential burglary in the Tri-County area today. The only radio traffic from Officer Whitaker tonight was him calling for backup because he claimed a suspect was non-compliant." Shaw swallowed hard, a bead of sweat tracing down his temple, despite the cool night air. The thin blue line he had relied on for years was evaporating before his eyes. "Captain, you are going to walk over to that curb, strip Officer Whitaker of his badge, his firearm, and his radio," Lang commanded, his tone leaving absolutely no room for debate. "He is then going to be transported to the state police barracks, not your local precinct, where he will be formally interviewed by the Attorney General's Civil Rights Division. You are relieved of jurisdiction over this incident." "Governor, with all due respect, you cannot unilaterally strip my department of jurisdiction," Shaw argued, his face flushing red with indignation. "Whitaker is a union member. He has rights. You're violating union protocol. I am the chief executive of this state, and I just witnessed an aggravated assault under color of law," Lang fired back, taking a step toward the captain. "Do not lecture me on protocol while that man's children are crying in the back seat of a car they were violently pulled from. Do it now, Shaw, or I will have the state police arrest you for obstruction of justice right here on this street." Shaw visibly shrank. Defeated and humiliated, he turned and walked over to Whitaker, The exchange was quiet, but the visual was deafening. Whitaker unclipped his gun belt, his hands shaking so violently he dropped his service weapon on the asphalt. A state trooper immediately stepped in, retrieving the weapon and escorting the disgraced officer to the back of a state cruiser. Governor Lang turned his attention back to Marcus and Elena, his stern expression softening into deep, genuine remorse. "Marcus, Elena, I cannot express how sorry I am that you experienced this in my neighborhood. This was supposed to be a night celebrating your incredible achievements for our state." Marcus let out a heavy sigh, pulling Elena closer. "Victor, I appreciate you stepping in. I really do. But right now, I just need to get my kids home. They are terrified. Ava won't stop crying, and Jordan hasn't said a word since that man dragged me out of the car." "I understand completely," Lang nodded. "However, I would ask you to come to my estate for just a little while. It's highly secure, completely private, and we have a medic on site who needs to look at your wrists. I also have my personal legal counsel waiting. You're going to need immediate representation because the police union is going to try to destroy you by tomorrow morning." Elena wiped her eyes, her medical training kicking back in as she assessed the tactical reality of their situation. "He's right, Marcus. We have it all on video, mine and the neighbors. But if we go home now, the local police might try to harass us. We need to lock this down." Marcus looked at his children in the back seat, then nodded firmly. "Lead the way, Governor." Under the heavy escort of state troopers, the Ellison family followed the governor's Suburban through the sprawling gates of the Cypress Ridge estate. But while they found a temporary sanctuary, Captain Shaw was already on his radio making a frantic, deeply panicked phone call to the president of the local Fraternal Order of Police, Frank Harlan. The cover-up machine was already revving its engines. Morning sunlight did little to wash away the trauma of the night before. Inside the plush, secure guest wing of the governor's estate, Marcus sat at a mahogany table sipping black coffee. His wrists were bandaged, treating the deep abrasions left by the ratcheted handcuffs. Across from him sat Elena, Governor Lang, and the man whose very name struck fear into corrupt institutions, Arthur Thornton. Thornton was a heavyweight civil rights attorney, impeccably dressed and surgically precise with his words. Thornton had spent hours reviewing Elena's cell phone video and the high-definition footage forwarded by Helen Carver, the brave neighbor. "This is a slam dunk, legally speaking," Thornton said, tapping his gold pen against the table. "Title 18, Section 242, Deprivation of Rights under Color of Law. We have false imprisonment, assault, and battery. But the court of public opinion is where this war will be fought first. And right on cue, the rats are coming out of the sewers." Thornton grabbed a remote control and turned on the massive flat-screen television on the wall, tuning it to the local news network. A live press conference was taking place on the steps of the precinct. Standing behind a podium plastered with union logos was Frank Harlan. Harlan was a bulldog of a man, aggressive, loud, and fiercely protective of his officers, regardless of their guilt. Crucially, however, Harlan had been given incomplete information. Captain Shaw, too terrified to admit to the union that the governor was directly involved, had only told Harlan that a wealthy suspect had used political connections to get Whitaker suspended after a routine stop. Harlan leaned into the microphones, his face contorted in manufactured outrage. "Last night, one of our most dedicated officers, Shane Whitaker, was viciously targeted by a politically connected elitist," Harlan barked into the cameras. "Officer Whitaker conducted a lawful, textbook traffic stop on a vehicle matching the description of a robbery suspect. The driver, a Mr. Marcus Ellison, became instantly belligerent, uncooperative, and physically aggressive. Officer Whitaker, fearing for his safety, utilized standard de-escalation tactics to detain the suspect." Elena scoffed aloud in the room, her grip tightening on her coffee mug. "De-escalation? He slammed Marcus against the car. On the screen, Harlan continued his brazen lies. Instead of complying with the law, Mr. Ellison used his high-level political connections to bypass standard procedures, resulting in Officer Whitaker being unlawfully detained by state police. We will not stand for this. We demand Officer Whitaker be reinstated immediately, and we are calling for a full investigation into Marcus Ellison's erratic and dangerous behavior last night. Thornton muted the television, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. Perfect. They just walked right into the trap. How is this perfect, Arthur? Marcus asked, his voice tight with anger. He is assassinating my character on live television. By noon, half the state is going to think I'm a violent criminal who pulled strings to get out of an arrest. Because, Marcus, Governor Lang interjected, pouring himself a cup of coffee. Frank Harlan doesn't know I was there. He doesn't know there are multiple videos. He is laying down an official public narrative built entirely on verifiable lies. When we drop the hammer, it won't just destroy Whitaker. It will completely discredit the entire corrupt union leadership. But the damage is done, Elena said quietly. Thornton opened his laptop. I have already coordinated with the governor's press secretary. In a short while, we are not holding a press conference. We are doing something much more lethal. We are uploading the unedited videos directly to the cloud and emailing the download links to every major news anchor, investigative journalist, and digital media outlet in the country. Attached to those videos will be a joint statement from my firm and the governor's office. What does the statement say? Elena asked. Thornton turned the laptop screen toward them. The headline of the press release read, Oak Creek Police Union fabricates assault to cover up racial profiling and brutality against state's lead engineer. Once this goes live, Thornton explained, Harlan will be forced to explain why his version of events completely contradicts high-definition video evidence. He will be asked why he claimed you were belligerent when the video shows you speaking calmly. He will be asked why he claimed Whitaker used de-escalation tactics when the video shows him violently assaulting a compliant man in front of his weeping children. It will be an absolute bloodbath for the union's public relations. At the appointed time, Thornton hit send. The digital explosion was instantaneous and catastrophic for the Oak Creek Police Department. Within minutes, local news stations interrupted their regular broadcasting to play the raw footage. The split-screen visuals were damning. On the left side of the screen, networks played Frank Harlan's arrogant press conference from earlier, claiming Marcus was physically aggressive. On the right side of the screen, they played Elena's cell phone video clearly showing Marcus moving slowly, speaking politely, and being violently slammed against the Lexus by a hyper-aggressive Officer Whitaker. Social media erupted. The hashtag Oak Creek cover-up began trending nationally within the hour. But the true bombshell hit when the networks aired Helen Carver's footage, which captured the arrival of the black Suburban and the unmistakable voice of Governor Victor Lang dressing down the terrified officer. The political fallout was immediate. Reporters swarmed the union headquarters demanding answers from Frank Harlan, who had seemingly vanished into thin air. Captain Shaw locked himself inside his office, refusing to take calls from the mayor or the city council. The narrative they had relied on for years, the assumption that the public would automatically believe the police over a black citizen, had violently imploded in their faces. Back at the estate, Marcus watched as the news anchors dissected the footage. A heavy, complex weight settled over him. He felt vindicated. Yes, the truth was out there. But he also felt a profound, chilling sorrow. Arthur, Marcus said quietly, staring at the television as they replayed the moment his face was smashed against the window. If Victor hadn't been driving by, if my neighbor hadn't been brave enough to step outside and record, no one would have believed me. They would have written the report exactly the way Harlan said it on TV. And my career, my life would be over today. Over. Governor Lang placed a heavy hand on Marcus's shoulder. That is exactly why we are not just going after Whitaker, Marcus. We are going to dismantle the entire system that allowed Whitaker to think he could get away with it. Thornton closed his laptop, his eyes locking onto Marcus's. The union is panicking right now. By this afternoon, they will realize they can't win the PR war, which means they are going to do what cornered animals do. They are going to dig into your past. They will look for any unpaid parking ticket, any college dispute, any slight zoning infraction to try and paint you as a criminal. We need to be ready for the dirt they are about to throw. Marcus sat up straight, his jaw clenched, the fear from the night before fully replaced by a burning, resolute anger. Let them dig. I have nothing to hide. It's time to take the fight to them. Frank Harlan, president of the local police union, paced the heavily carpeted floor of his office like a trapped animal. The catastrophic failure of his morning press conference was still playing on a loop across every major news network. Realizing they had entirely lost control of the public narrative within mere hours of the footage leaking, Harlan shifted to the darkest pages of his playbook. If they could not defend Officer Shane Whitaker on the merits of his indefensible actions, they had to systematically destroy the credibility of the victims and the witnesses. Behind locked doors, Harlan authorized an illegal off-the-books expenditure to hire a notoriously aggressive private intelligence firm. Their mandate was brutal and unambiguous: tear apart Marcus Ellison's life, find any hidden skeletons, and intimidate the wealthy neighbor Helen Carver into retracting her video. Operatives descended on the Ellisons' background with terrifying efficiency. They audited Marcus's college transcripts, subpoenaed his structural engineering licenses under false pretenses, and combed through every financial transaction his architectural firm had made in recent years. They scoured Elena's medical records at the pediatric clinic, desperately hunting for malpractice suits, patient complaints, or prescription discrepancies. They interviewed former neighbors, college roommates, and rival contractors, looking for any excuse to label Marcus as unhinged, violent, or corrupt. Hours turned into days, and the high-priced private investigators came back empty-handed. Marcus and Elena Ellison lived impeccably clean lives. Their credit scores were flawless, their professional records were decorated with philanthropic accolades, and they had absolutely zero criminal history, not even a parking ticket in years. Frustrated and running out of time as massive public protests began forming outside the precinct, Harlan ordered his men to pivot their focus to what he wrongly assumed was the weakest link: Helen Carver. Late one evening, a heavy unseasonal fog rolled through Oak Creek Boulevard. Two heavily built men in cheap suits arrived at Helen Carver's sprawling estate. They did not identify themselves as police officers, but their demeanor carried the unmistakable heavy threat of rogue authority. They stood on her expensive mahogany porch, glaring menacingly into the security cameras, demanding she come out to discuss the doctored and heavily edited footage she had allegedly uploaded to the internet. "We know you have lucrative catering contracts with the city, Mrs. Carver," one of the men sneered through the reinforced glass of her front door, his hand resting casually inside his jacket. "It would be a terrible shame if those municipal contracts were suddenly frozen pending a lengthy federal fraud investigation. We just need you to sign a simple affidavit. Just a piece of paper stating you manipulated the lighting and audio of that video to make Officer Whitaker look aggressive." Helen Carver stood inside her dark foyer, clutching her smartphone. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She was terrified, but she was also incredibly intelligent and fiercely protective of her community. What these hired union thugs didn't realize was that her home wasn't just equipped with a standard consumer doorbell camera. It was outfitted with a state-of-the-art security system. Every single word they spoke, every veiled threat they levied, was captured in pristine resolution with directional audio. Instead of opening the door and falling into their trap, Helen Carver hit a single button on her phone screen. The system immediately encrypted the file and forwarded it directly to Arthur Thornton's secure legal server. "Get off my property before I call the state police," Helen Carver announced through the two-way intercom. Her voice was remarkably steady, cutting through the thick fog. "You have exactly 10 seconds before you are trespassing on private property, and I have already sent this entire interaction to the governor's legal team." Realizing their intimidation tactic had spectacularly backfired, the thugs turned and fled into the night, their tires squealing against the wet asphalt. But the irreversible damage was already done. The next morning brought an unprecedented level of retaliation from Governor Victor Lang's office. The attempted intimidation of a key witness was the absolute final straw. Lang bypassed the local prosecutors entirely, knowing they were far too intertwined with the police union to be objective. He placed a direct emergency call to the United States Department of Justice in Washington, D.C. By noon, a fleet of unmarked black SUVs descended upon the precinct. Agents wearing navy blue windbreakers with FBI emblazoned across the back in stark yellow lettering swarmed the building, establishing a hard perimeter. The local desk sergeants watched in stunned, helpless silence as heavily armed federal agents locked down the entire precinct. Special Agent Grant Harrison, a seasoned, no-nonsense investigator from the DOJ's Civil Rights Division, walked directly into Captain Leonard Shaw's office without knocking. Shaw was mid-sentence on a frantic phone call with Frank Harlan when Harrison slammed a thick federal search warrant down on the desk. "Captain Shaw, hang up the phone immediately," Agent Harrison ordered, his voice echoing in the confined space with chilling authority. "You and your entire department are officially under federal investigation for a coordinated conspiracy to violate the civil rights of Marcus Ellison and for the subsequent witness tampering of Helen Carver. Step away from your computer right now." "This is an absolute outrage," Shaw sputtered, his face flushing crimson as he dropped the phone receiver. "You have no jurisdiction here. We are actively conducting an internal affairs review. Your internal affairs division is catastrophically compromised, and you are no longer in control of this precinct," Harrison replied coldly. Behind him, a team of FBI forensic accountants and cyber agents began boxing up physical files and cloning hard drives. "We are seizing all disciplinary records, dispatch logs, and internal communications regarding Officer Shane Whitaker. And let me give you a piece of free advice, Captain. If my team visions a single deleted email or shredded document, I will personally see to it that you face federal obstruction charges before the sun goes down." The federal raid decisively broke the back of the cover-up. When the FBI cracked open Whitaker's highly classified internal affairs file, they uncovered a terrifying, decades-long pattern of unchecked abuse. Over his career, Whitaker had accumulated numerous excessive force complaints. Many of those complaints involved black motorists driving through affluent neighborhoods. Every single one had been dismissed, buried, or ruled justified by Captain Shaw and the corrupt union leadership. Whitaker wasn't a good cop who made a bad split-second decision. He was a violent serial predator operating under a badge, shielded by a broken system. The revelation sent massive shockwaves through the political landscape of the state. The local mayor, desperate to salvage his own plummeting political career, immediately terminated Captain Shaw and publicly called for the immediate resignation of Frank Harlan. The union, suddenly facing sweeping federal racketeering and conspiracy charges, abandoned Whitaker entirely to save themselves. Cut off from his powerful union lawyers, permanently stripped of his badge, and facing a crushing wave of federal indictments, Shane Whitaker finally broke. He sat alone in a sterile interrogation room at the FBI field office, weeping bitterly into his handcuffed hands, begging for a plea deal that the Department of Justice had absolutely no intention of offering. Later, the sweeping architecture of the United States District Court provided a solemn backdrop for the final chapter of the nightmare. The mahogany benches were packed with journalists, civil rights activists, and members of the Oak Creek community. Marcus Ellison sat at the plaintiff's table, wearing a tailored charcoal suit. Elena sat directly behind him in the gallery, holding Jordan and Ava tightly. The children had spent months in trauma therapy, slowly unlearning the terror that had been forced upon them that night. They were doing much better, but Marcus knew the scars would always remain. Across the aisle, wearing a standard-issue orange prison jumpsuit, sat Shane Whitaker. The former officer looked unrecognizable. He had lost significant weight, his posture was completely defeated, and his arrogant swagger was gone, replaced by the terrified trembling of a man who knew his life was over. Judge Eleanor Vance, a stern federal judge known for her unforgiving stance on police corruption, presided over the sentencing hearing. Whitaker had pled guilty to multiple federal charges, including deprivation of rights under color of law, aggravated assault, and witness tampering. The trial had been avoided, but the sentencing was the moment of true reckoning. "Before I pass down this sentence," Judge Vance stated, looking over her spectacles at the courtroom, "the court recognizes the victim, Mr. Marcus Ellison, who wishes to read an impact statement." Marcus stood slowly. He buttoned his suit jacket, grabbed a single piece of paper from the desk, and walked to the podium. The entire courtroom fell dead silent. He didn't look at the judge right away. Instead, he turned his head and locked eyes directly with Shane Whitaker. Whitaker couldn't maintain eye contact. He looked down at his shackled wrists. "Look at me," Marcus demanded. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried a profound, heavy command that forced Whitaker to raise his head. "On the night in question," Marcus began, his voice echoing off the high vaulted ceilings, "you pulled me over not because I was speeding, and not because I matched a description. You pulled me over because you saw a black man driving a luxury vehicle in a neighborhood you believed he did not belong in. You looked at my family, my beautiful children, and my wife, and you saw an opportunity to exercise brutal, unchecked power." Marcus paused, taking a steady breath. Elena wiped a tear from her cheek in the gallery. "You slammed me against the hood of my car. You traumatized my young daughter and my young son. You humiliated me in front of my neighbors. But what haunts me the most is not what happened to me. What haunts me is the terrifying reality of what happens to the men who don't have a governor drive by to save them." A heavy, emotional murmur rippled through the gallery. "If Governor Lang had not been hosting that dinner," Marcus continued, his voice rising with righteous conviction, "if Helen Carver had not been brave enough to stand on her lawn and record your violence, if we did not have the financial resources to hire top-tier legal counsel, where would I be today? I would be sitting exactly where you are sitting. My career would be destroyed. My family would be shattered. And you would still be patrolling the streets, hunting for your next victim, protected by a system that was designed to protect the badge at all costs." Marcus looked up at Judge Vance. "Your Honor, I am not here seeking revenge. I am here seeking structural justice. The man sitting before you is a symptom of a much deeper terminal disease within the Oak Creek Police Department. I ask that you give him the maximum sentence allowable by law, not just to punish him, but to send a deafening message to every corrupt officer and complicit union leader in this country. The days of hiding behind a badge to commit acts of terror against innocent families are over." Marcus stepped away from the podium and walked back to his seat. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Judge Vance nodded slowly, deeply moved by the statement. She gathered her papers and looked down at Whitaker with pure contempt. "Shane Whitaker," the judge boomed, "you took an oath to protect and serve the community. Instead, you used your authority as a weapon of intimidation and racial prejudice. You terrorized a compliant citizen, assaulted a father in front of his children, and relied on a corrupt institutional shield to cover your tracks. That shield is broken. Judge Vance struck her gavel against the sounding block. I hereby sentence you to 180 months, 15 years, in federal prison without the possibility of parole. Furthermore, you are permanently barred from holding any position in law enforcement or private security for the remainder of your life. Officers, remand the prisoner into custody. 2 federal marshals stepped forward, grabbing Whitaker by the arms and dragging him out of the courtroom. As the heavy wooden doors swung shut behind the disgraced cop, a collective exhale of relief washed over the Ellison family. The fallout from that day reshaped the entire state. Driven by the irrefutable evidence of the federal investigation, Governor Lang pushed through the most aggressive police reform bill in the country. The Ellison Act completely dismantled qualified immunity for officers found guilty of civil rights violations, mandated independent civilian oversight boards, and made it a felony for union officials to cover up excessive force complaints. Frank Harlan, the aggressive union president, resigned in disgrace to avoid federal indictments. Captain Leonard Shaw lost his pension and faded into obscurity. The Oak Creek Police Department was entirely restructured under a federal consent decree. Later, on a warm summer evening, Marcus Ellison stood on the balcony of the newly completed Coastal Revitalization Project. The massive structural achievement was finally open to the public, a stunning testament to his genius and perseverance. He felt a soft pair of arms wrap around his waist from behind. Elena rested her chin on his shoulder, looking out at the sparkling ocean. "You did it," she whispered softly. Marcus turned around, pulling his wife into a deep embrace. He looked over her shoulder to see Jordan and Ava running happily along the pier, their laughter carrying over the sound of the crashing waves. The trauma of that night had not broken them. It had forged them into something stronger, something unbreakable. Justice had not just been served, it had been permanently cemented into the foundation of their community. Thank you so much for reading to the dramatic conclusion of this intense, real-life inspired story. We hope you felt the power, the justice, and the emotional triumph of the Ellison family as they stood up against a corrupt system and won. If this story moved you, please like this video right now to show your support. Don't forget to share this with your friends and family to spread awareness about the importance of standing up for what is right. Finally, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss out on our upcoming, thrilling, real-life dramatic stories. Your engagement helps us bring more powerful narratives to light. See you in the next video.